Welcome back to the third and final installment of this special edition of Book Talk with Jordan and Stefan, where we are looking at Harlan Ellison's Deathbird Stories, the Pantheon of Modern Gods. We had talked in the last segment about how this is very much the structure of how these stories are laid out. They hit you really hard in those first seven, and then the middle stories are kind of more sedate. They're a little bit more contemplative. There are some intense moments, but they're more contemplative. And then these last few stories ramp it back up, and they don't just match the intensity of the first seven. They blast it completely out of the water. So with that in mind, or I should say the last six, really. With that in mind, we delve into the last third of Deathbird Stories. So it begins with The Place with No Name. And this is an interesting story because it explores the idea that Christ had a homosexual relationship with Prometheus. Stefan, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, I don't know if that's really stressed in the story. It is briefly mentioned, but the idea is that Prometheus and Jesus were those characters throughout history that we can look to and say, okay, if Prometheus was alive, this was a big deal. If Jesus was alive, this was a big deal, and that's how they impacted us. And it sort of has the same typical scenario of a man in a modern setting getting transported to a scenario he's not familiar with or into another body he's not familiar with. And this is another rendition of that. So the story itself is pretty simple, but it deals with the concept of whether or not someone can be forgiven after a certain point in time, and what was the value of that crime. To them, it meant everything, but to the powers that be, they say, "Oh, you cannot do this. You must be condemned." And the issue I mainly have with it is, why was this person chosen? Who is this person? And why did he suddenly accept his fate? It's very strange that he just sort of goes along with it. It just sort of magically happens, and he actually magically gets punished for it. And we don't know how long it will take. How long, as if it's an ongoing thing. Someone must be punished. Mm-hmm. So it's this concept that these two people loved humanity so much they were willing to break the rules to allow mankind to evolve, whether it's physically or spiritually.
Absolutely. And I think for me, this story strikes me as a dry run for some of the ideas that are explored in the story, The Deathbird, namely kind of redefining our knowledge, kind of the Gnostic Catholic knowledge that we have of creation, creation myths and that kind of thing. And it seemed like a dry run for that. And I agree with you that I couldn't quite understand what this character, why he was selected. He starts out at the beginning. He's just a street pimp, and is on the run from the law after beating a woman to death. Does not really give us a lot of understanding of why he's transferred to this other world to explore these ideas about Christ and Prometheus. But it does return to that similar motif that Ellison seems to like to use, which is that going into the shop, the little shopkeeper's storefront and everything. In this case, he goes in and there's nothing in it except the guy that's is implied to be an angel or something, but he's just the shopkeeper. And that's shown up in some previously in O Ye of Little Faith in this collection. It shows up again in another Ellison story called Jinn No Chaser, and then and that's Jinn like Djinn, like a genie. And then it shows up again. There's another story in Shatterday. The name is escaping me right now, where that shows up again. So this is a motif that Ellison really likes, and he really likes to explore. And so it's an interesting, it's another vantage on that. Beyond that, I think we can go ahead and look at the next story, and this one is very profound. This is Pain God. Stefan, why don't you set that one up?
Well, this is actually my second favorite story in the book because it's so simple. Anyone can relate to this. It starts off with a a rather curious fellow working in his cubicle who happens to dish out pain to all of the universes based on his superior's commands. And he's been doing this for pretty much as long as he can remember. And he has a crisis of faith of what his job really means. I guess you can say he's melancholic. And he exits his cubicle and he tries to experience the death or the last remaining moments of a person's life on Earth. And it's such a simple, obvious story of what does it mean to hurt people, and why is pain why is it valuable? What does it mean to feel pain, and what value does that bring to others? And that's the problem he was having, because he was told his other previous workers who had this job didn't do too well. They didn't last too long. So, and this is an immortal race of space aliens that live beyond our understanding. So he's having a very mundane problem at his day job, and he's not sure why.
Yeah, and it is interesting because it's about him kind of coming to experience the pain that he's been inflicting on the world, or on all the universe, really. And it is very much Nietzsche is thematically referenced throughout this book. He is literally referenced in the Deathbird story, but he is there is a Nietzschean element to this, very much so. This that which does not kill us makes us stronger attitude, and the idea that pain is the great motivating force. It's the great hunger drives us to eat, cold drives us to create shelter and all of that. And so coming to understand in this almost sadomasochistic sense that by inflicting pain, you're bringing out the best in people, and you're actually doing right by them. And it's a very dark, very sinister idea, but it's also very fascinating, beautiful, beautifully argued and beautifully rendered. So yeah, it's a great story, and it's actually the basis for a short story collection of its own called Pain, God, and Other Delusions, and that one is phenomenal as well. And that deals with all the different types of pain that we experience, and really goes into some fascinating areas with that. So we come to the next story, which is Ernest and the Machine God. So this is an interesting little story. It deals, again, we see, we've been seeing some recurring themes throughout these stories, and one of them is the femme fatale, the seductress, and everything. And this is a woman, similar in a way to Helena Bernov, except that, who we discussed in part 2, except that Helena Bernov is more she's like a siren. She's pure, unadulterated sexuality and feminine beauty that is designed literally and designed being the operative word, designed to wreck and destroy men. And this woman, the woman that's the main character in this story, very much a seductress, very much that uses her sexual wiles and sexual cunning to get what she wants, but she's a little bit deeper of a character. She's a more literal human character as well. A little bit deeper of a character, though. It's not that she's just using her genitalia to get what she wants. She's really more of just a alpha female, if you will, that she's going to get what she wants in life come hell or high water. And so it is her encountering, her car breaks down in the small backwoods hick town, and the guy that's ultimately able to fix her car is this kind of idiot savant that he's maybe mentally retarded in some way or something. And he's able to fix her car. He's almost like a car whisperer. He just talks to the car and it comes back to life. And I don't want to give too much away because there's kind of an interesting moment at the end that happens between these two characters. But it's very much I think, a story of somebody who has considered themselves on the absolute top of the heap for the entirety of their existence, finally encountering someone that they are awed by, that they are stunned by, and amazed by, and wanting to try not to dominate this person, but to come level with them, to be equal with them. It's her first experience of wanting to be equal to somebody rather than superior to them, and kind of the darker implications of what that means. That, if you've lived your life this way, the whole of your life, you can't really detach from it. If that makes sense.
The foreword of this story is kind of cute because Ellison says, well, about 45% of this is true, and good luck figuring out which part of that is. So we sort of guess we can eliminate the fantastical part, but it's nice for him to actually say this is based off something that he actually has experienced or knows about. The other part, which I was related to the theme of the Deathbird, is that he's saying that the gods are essentially mad. They have all this power. They don't care for us mortals. But there are forms of them that they respect. Every god respects, and that one quality that they respect in man is innocence. And if you mess up innocence, or you mess with that, and that happens to be one of the things that the gods have favored, a person that God has favored, there's no innocence, or sorry, there's no what's the word I'm looking for? There's no they don't care. They will just enact justice instantly for having desecrated their was a supplicant, I guess the word they would use. Yeah, so it's a very straightforward story. It's a woman seductress again. This is probably the more human version as opposed to the Helena Bernot, for sure. It's very simple. It's kind of strange because I guess this is something that might have happened. This woman is terrified out of her mind of what happened. She thought she could win in this game of wits, and she loses, and she's on this chase, and then her car breaks down for that, and she takes advantage of this. I wouldn't say she takes advantage, but it's pretty much that. She's wondering what it would be like to have this sort of relationship with this fellow, and it just sort of just finishes there because it's a short story. You can't expect to keep the story going. So it does make you think about what was the value of this woman and how she could actually take that godly ability from someone. And there's really no explanation as how she does that aside from being a woman. But it's sort of makes you think, okay, well, maybe she just wanted to do it for fun. Maybe she was bored. Maybe she was terrified because she met her match that day. What does it mean to her? We're not too sure. It's just the things she does, and this is what happens to people who play these sorts of games, as opposed to the Helena story where the gods know what that creature was, and they don't blame her. They blame the person she inflicts it upon. That change of faith. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of a different way of looking at the same theme. A woman as seductress, and who gets punished and who doesn't.
Absolutely. So the next story is interesting. This is called Rock God, and this is not a rock god in the sense of Jim Morrison or Jimi Hendrix. This is a literal god of rock, and it starts out in Stonehenge and it ends in New York City. And the last quarter of the story deals with an unscrupulous real estate developer that bears more than a passing resemblance to our current president. But I think this character was created long before Donald Trump was on the scene. But it's surprising how well it fits. Why don't you summarize it a little more, Stefan? And I enjoyed this story. It's a little bit more of just like a light. No, I won't say lighthearted, but it's just a kind of a quick fantasy romp. It's not as deep as the others.
Right. At first, when I read it, I wasn't too impressed. But it was interesting because he combined all these mythologies into one. Because the rock god separates himself, and all his pieces scatter throughout the globe, and those form religions and followings, and there's these holy relics. And you kind of wonder why he's doing this. What's the point of separating himself? He already had followers. And it goes, the ages pass and these rocks move around and they imbue certain abilities, but there's always a horrible end to the people who have used these abilities or what have you. And yeah, it does come to this shady builder who is building, was it 115 stories, some gigantic tower. Yeah. And it wasn't built to code, so everyone's like freaking out this thing could fall over. And this murderous event occurs,
Mm-hmm.
and the rock god suddenly decides to wake up. And it was a very funny last line of the story that the rock god knew something like this was going to happen, and he wanted to become even stronger. So he had to separate himself. He had to go to sleep for all these centuries so that he could absorb more concrete, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't too sure exactly what he was trying to accomplish there, but it was sort of this whole plan of his that since I'm being worshipped, I need more worshipers, and this is how you do it.
Yeah, build more rocks, stone. He needs as many rock, stone structures built as possible, and so he comes back, and the minute he comes back, he immediately assimilates all of New York City because, and that was his intention all along. But yeah, and I like the idea of the different stone, the different parts of his stone, sacred stone, getting passed around all these different cultures. It's like the Lochnar in heavy metal and everything. And so I like that. So the last two stories are both novellas, and the first one is called Adrift Just Off the Islets of Langerhans, and this one is...
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Oh, man. It's out there, and it's really out there, and it is an absolute trip. It's a little bit... It's funny. Ellison has this way of being lighthearted about very serious things sometimes, and... This is a story about a man who has, by hiring the best researchers in the world, and these incredible researchers of the supernatural and all of this, he has acquired a map with the exact location of his soul, and now then he goes to a longtime friend of his who has the scientific ability to shrink him down, transport his consciousness into a microscopic version of himself so that he may go into his body and find his soul. And as surreal as that sounds, that doesn't even begin to crack the surface, because when he goes into his body, there are references to, organs and tissue and, muscular tissue and all these things. But then there's this whole other world of mountains and deserts and skeletal remains and storms and, caves and all of this. That we start to wonder, is this happening literally or is it happening symbolically? It's a fascinating journey. It's really ultimately, it's metaphorically, it is this person, he's looking for his soul. He's trying to find meaning and purpose in life, and it's that kind of that postmodernist question of trying to find meaning in a godless universe and all of that. And I think it's funny. It seems very bizarre, and it's funny. Ellison knows how bizarre it is because there are characters in the story that are like background characters that are hearing the explanations of what's happening, and they start snickering and chuckling, and everything. So he knows how insane all of this is. But if you're willing to go, push through it and read it, the ultimate argument, it's ultimately actually a very heartwarming story, as weirdly bleak and disturbing as it is. There's a heartwarming element to it. So, really cool story, and very much worth the read. What did you think?
Oh, weird does not begin. This guy's a werewolf, okay? This is like science fiction meets science fantasy meets... he contacts his old-time friend, Dr. Frankenstein, who's in charge of the second CERN. It's just like, what the hell is going on here? And then he has this, as Jordan said, he shrinks himself down. So there's actually now two versions of him. So
Yeah.
there's one version, which is the normal version, which he's actually conscious of, and there's the second version of him, which is having this trippy experience in his body somewhere, which is not necessarily his body. It's like this magical dreamland of memories, and he's trying to find his soul, and he finds other things. Also, that he could die because he's a werewolf, he's tired of life, whatever.
Yeah.
And the journey is such a trippy, bizarre, symbolic thing. It probably would make you very angry. Like anyone who's like serious about, okay, he's using a lot of like, this is as much science. I'd say more science than the second story, which is all about carbs blowing up and all the technical stuff you had to go through. This is way more than that. So to have all this science, then to have this trippy symbolic meaning, and then he's talking to the assistant, and the assistant's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Even the doctor's like, "This is too weird. This is too Freudian for me." And it's like, where are we going with this, Ellison? Like, what are you trying to say? And then he spells it out rather clearly near the end. But it's so, like, to get there is like, where are we going? There's a symbolism with the fish he's trying to feed at the start. It's this creature that never eats all the other fish, and what does that mean?
That's how intricate this story is. Yes, this character is a werewolf, and he has to sleep. To sleep, he has to shackle himself to the bed so that if he mutates in the night, he won't get away and go kill people. And so that's it is a fascinating story, and it's one of those things I love. We've talked about, we've seen it in this, in Pain God, in Place with No Name, in a lot of these stories, and certainly we're going to see it in Deathbird. Is that Ellison is aware of kind of the Joseph Campbell monomyth, that so many of these mythological creatures all serve the same purposes thematically and metaphorically, and they're interchangeable that way. And so we see these characters in his fiction interacting with each other and working, colluding with one another and that kind of thing. And you can see in that, and certainly in this story, how he was such a huge influence on Neil Gaiman and everything. So writers like that, and certainly Terry Pratchett and people like that. So absolutely killer story, really bizarre, but worth getting into as nutty as it is. And that brings us finally, now if you've noticed, we've been burning through these last few stories a little faster than the others, and that is because we come now finally to the mother lode, the Deathbird. And this is the story. If you thought that the stories previously were tackling major topics, this story is the story of the last human being in existence, the direct lineal descendant of Adam from the Garden of Eve, who has been in cryogenic storage in hell for 250,000 years and has now been thawed out and brought back to the surface by the devil so that he can kill God and end the world.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think you got it there, yeah.
This is one of the most, and that is kind of, that's the idea, but that doesn't even begin to, I told you a lot of the major events just then, but that does not even begin to scratch the surface of everything that goes on in this story, because this is Ellison making the case that God is evil, Satan and the snake in the Garden of Eden and all that, they are the good guys, and they've just been getting, the devil has just been getting bashed on throughout history. This is a brazenly satanic story.
Well, yeah, in that regard, it's kind of like the fallacy of a God. Like, if there is a good and great God who can do anything, why did he have all these errors? Why did he make all these mistakes? Why did he create all these flaws? If he knew all this stuff would happen, why would he get angry? I mean, that's the sort of a joke on religion in that regard. And Ellison says, well, wait a second. What if this was actually the way it should have gone, but we're seeing it from a different perspective? And that implies that what he's been saying throughout the stories are that the gods are mad. and they have all these powers, and they just use them because they want to. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And with this, it's not just the simple theme of the gods are mad. It's combining a variety of narratives, and they meet up at the same point. It's the man remembering his past lives. There's one about a dog that is just cute. It's just everything is slowly coming together. And then, of course, Ellison is way too clever for just writing a story or 3 stories. He has to quiz you. Yeah. And he has to stop the story. He says, I'm going to write an essay now. You're like, what? What the hell is going on?
Right. This story, that's one of the things I love about this. And it's funny, as a kid when I read it, I didn't quite get why it was written. It's a test. It's written as a test with essay questions and everything like that. And I'll read you the first paragraph to show you how this begins. 1. This is a test. Take notes. This will count as 3/4 of your final grade. Hints. Remember, in chess, kings cancel each other out and cannot occupy adjacent squares, are therefore all-powerful and totally powerless, cannot affect one another, produce stalemate. Hinduism is a polytheistic religion. The sect of Atman worships the divine spark within man, in effect saying, thou art God. Provisos of equal time are not served by one viewpoint having media access to 200 million people in prime time, while opposing viewpoints are provided with a soapbox on the corner. Not everyone tells the truth. Operational note. These sections may be taken out of numerical sequence. Rearrange them to suit yourself for optimum clarity. Turn over your test papers and begin. And that is, yeah, I mean, that is the level of intricacy that we see in this, and it is it's so interesting. And what's interesting to me is, I've reread this story at different points in my life. When I read it when I was 12, I was not nearly literate enough and well-read enough to fully appreciate it. Nietzsche is mentioned directly. Zarathustra comes into play, and the questions about what it means to say that God is dead. And then in a way, this is Ellison trying to kind of, I think, complete Nietzsche's argument that Nietzsche, died before he was able to fully articulate. The story ends. It says the last line of the story is, "This is for Mark Twain." And as a kid, I could never understand what that meant. And now I realize what he's referring to, because as a kid, you think of Mark Twain as doing Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer and a couple others and things, and that's about it. You don't know, it's not until you get older that you find out about The Mysterious Stranger and Letters from the Earth, the character where, or the story where the stories where the devil is the good guy, Satan is the good guy, and humanity in general and God, they're all the bad guys. And so that's, I think, obviously what this is in reference to, and kind of was probably Ellison's philosophical genesis for this story. And what's so interesting to me is how I love how he goes through and points out, it's all the little things, and that's what the test is so great for. Like at one point it stops it and says, says it is commonly believed that it was an apple that Eve gave to Adam in the Garden of Eden, but apples are not endemic to that region of the world. Which of these following fruit would be most likely? And it lists a few. It's funny, my high school English teacher, honors lit teacher, actually told us all that it would have been a quince, which is not one of the options that Ellison lists. But anyway, it's so interesting because that's true. Most people think it is an apple in the Garden of Eden, and in the Bible it's not described as an apple. It's in Paradise Lost by John Milton that it's described as an apple. But that's one of those little pieces of information that's been added to the story over time, and Ellison is making the case that, look, this is something, this mythology has snowballed over time, and what you're thinking of as these absolute truths are things that have been added along the way, and things have been added and taken out, and you've only ever heard the story from one side, And it's funny, there's a trending meme on the internet it's called Good Guy Satan or Good Guy Lucifer or something like that, and it's a picture of the devil, and it'll say something like, God loves you for worshiping him. I just want you to think for yourself. I respect you enough to think for yourself, that kind of thing. And making all of those arguments that when you really stop and hold up the mirror, we have been cowering to this power-mad deity, he's compared to the Wizard of Oz in the story. We've been taken in by the Wizard of Oz, and we're, what does that mean? What's the reevaluation of values that comes from that? What else did you take from it, Stefan?
Well, there was really good symbolism. I'm not too sure what the Zarathustra little mini story was. I mean, it just was thrown in there. It could have been thrown at any point, but the symbolism with the dog, the death of his mother, and how that related to the death at the ending. The battle of wits, that was really funny. It made me think of a few things, but how do you fight a god? Because you can't. If this was the analogy from the start that kings cannot fight each other, how do you do that? And this is what he was showing. There's all these little details that you go, oh, okay, that's what he was referring to.
Yeah.
So there is symbolism. There is I wouldn't call it foreshadowing, but it's like it's almost a Chekhov's gun sort of thing. It's like this is going to happen. We just don't know in what regard. So he doesn't just willy-nilly write stuff down. Aside from the Zarathustra comment, I was like, okay, where did this thing? It just popped in there.
Well, I think if you've read, I think that's actually, I need to go back and look at the exact wording, but I think that's actually a direct passage taken from the Spake Zarathustra.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and that's and that actually, it makes a lot more sense, because the metaphor of going up and coming down a mountain factors prominently in this, and that factors prominently in Thus Spake Zarathustra as well. And what he's saying is, in the Zarathustra passage, it's the passage where the old man says, you took your ashes up to the top of the mountain, now will you bring your fire down to earth? And it's that Promethean message again, and I think kind of entertaining the idea that the fire is the enlightenment, but it's also the destruction. That we can't have enlightenment without destruction, and that's a very profound idea. When we attain knowledge, new information, new knowledge, the old knowledge has to die. It has to die out, and God is essentially a concept. What Ayn Rand would call a canned philosophy. It's a ready-made set of ideas by which you live your life. And then when we gain the knowledge of the actual knowledge of how the world works, that kills God. The belief in God or lack of belief in God kills God. And so it is saying that that through enlightenment, there is always destruction. There's always the destruction of old ideas, the destruction of things we hold sacred. And that's why we have to have that mindset of that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger, because we're going to be constantly confronting uncomfortable truths to attain enlightenment. And I think that's really what this story is saying.
Well, there are some grammatic issues. I'm not sure. I'm not totally concerned whether this was intentional or not, but it does make you kind of curious. Okay, why was dog spelled backwards as Gad? I don't know if that was just my copy. Maybe it was your copy as well. Was that
Wait, Gad?
Yeah.
G-A-D?
G-A-D, yeah. And I was like, okay, maybe that was translated wrong. I don't know.
I can tell you.
Okay.
Got it right here. Let's see.
That was the one.
Yeah,
one
it's
of the
dog in mine, not
it is. It is God in yours. Okay. The other one was the dialogue and narration where Snake is trying to describe that Nathan Stark was always Nathan Stark when Nathan's asking who am I, and there's no double quotes meaning dialogue. It was all just in narrative. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is where this weird transition between Nathan remembering what he was and what Snake was, because this is I don't know if that was intentional or if that was just my copy or what. So little things like that, I was like, okay, maybe Ellison's taking some liberties here. Maybe the translator or the guy who scribed it down to my digital copy got it wrong. Who knows?
That's probably it, because they had to make they had, at some point, somebody had to type it in for a
Right.
digital transfer. That's actually, on a side note, this brings me to something very cool. And there was a Kickstarter done recently, and I contributed to it. I was proud to do so. That it's the Harlan Ellison Digital Preservation Project. And the thing is, if you notice right now, a lot of Ellison's books are only available as self-published books. He has been self-publishing his own literary canon in recent years, and part of that is because he is put out with the publishing industry and doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And his attitude, I think, is kind of like, well, just here's my, he's in his 80s now, so he's just like, here's my stuff if you want it. Otherwise, I'm done. Doesn't want to deal with publishers anymore. But they have actually, there's been the Online Preservation Project, where what they are doing is taking Ellison's entire repertoire, which is almost 2,000 stories, and to say nothing of essays and articles and op-eds and reviews and everything else. They're taking everything he's ever written, and they are committing it to digital form for preservation and for republishing purposes. Because what happens is, it's like a master of a CD, or a master of an album. You have an original copy of the text from which all of the other copies are derived. And some of these stories have been out of print for so long that that original copy that they pull the print from is, it's yellowed over and you can barely read it and that kind of thing. So this is going back and establishing a final print of everything that Ellison has ever done. And so that's actually something that they're seeking to correct. But yeah, I have to think that what you encountered there was just a typo when somebody did the transfer. But one of the things to clarify what we keep talking about with the dog, one of the stories, or one of the elements of this test, there is a section of the test that is an essay written by Harlan Ellison that is about his dog, and this whole story was apparently written after immediately after his dog died. His most famous story, A Boy and His Dog, A Boy and His Dog was the one that was written after his dog passed away, and it became one of his most well-known stories and a movie. But I actually, when I reread this, I skipped that whole section about the dog, because it deals with his dog being put down, being euthanized. And for those of you who know me, pets being put down, that is a big, big emotional sticking point for me. So I actually skipped it this time. But I will give you a brief idea of what we're talking about. The dog's name is Abu, and it goes like this. It says, Abu looked at me, and I knew that he was just a dog, but if he could have spoken with human tongue, he could not have said more eloquently than he did with a look, "Don't leave me with strangers." So I held him as they laid him down, and the vet slipped the lanyard up around his right foreleg and drew it tight to bulge the vein. And I held his head, and he turned he turned it away from me as the needle went in. It was impossible to tell the moment he passed over from life to death. He simply laid his head on my hand, his eyes fluttered shut, and he was gone. That's what we're referring to when we talk about the dog, and it's talking, euthanasia. He's talking about, one of the themes in the story is that euthanasia is, and being willing to mercy kill someone you love is the ultimate expression of love. And so these are stories that we talked in the first part about how there's blood and guts and sex and drugs and rock and roll and all of the fiery, shocking high points of life, in this, but it really comes down to Ellison's willingness to just take these emotionally wrenching moments in our lives and create beautiful art around them. And so that section really, more than any, I think, it's so effective to me because it captures it's not. It's showing us that this is not just his wild punk rock flight of fancy, where we're going to put a middle finger in the air to God and the Christian establishment and say that Satan's the good guy and all of that. He's really making a deep emotional case here, and it resonates. Oh my God, it resonates. So, oh my God. All right, so I think we've probably plumbed the depths of Deathbird Stories. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up, Stefan?
Well, these are all stories you should read, obviously, in its anthology form. It's the last one was always a lot more complicated. It was a lot more, I wouldn't say writer on board moment, but very sort of writer next to you moments. Like, hey, wait a second, you're reading a book. I'm a clever son of a bitch. This is what you should be aware of. It's like he even says this is clearly an appeal to emotion by the writer. It's like, okay, we chill out, man. Let me read here. He does these little snides to you all the time.
It kind of reminds me of Italo Calvino and If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, that kind of thing. That way, the writer on board.
Yeah, he's just totally there with you. Like, okay, let's have a little chill out here and talk about it. Okay, what?
I know, and that's what I love about Ellison is that he is totally. If you go to those of you who have been listening, go on YouTube and listen to Ellison's commentaries. He did a bunch of commentaries for the Sci-Fi Network, the Sci-Fi Channel, which he hates the word sci-fi. He says it sounds like crickets fucking, but. He did a bunch of segments, kind of like Andy Rooney style commentary segments for the Sci-Fi Channel back in the day. And he said, and you get from there the way he talks. He's someone that's filled with passion and fury, and he's totally unafraid to. It's like a Gonzo, Hunter S. Thompson Gonzo style of writing almost, where he just dives into it and just grabs you by the throat, that kind of thing. And so it's kind of like in the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream video game. It is totally appropriate that Harlan Ellison is the voice of AM, because the Allied Master Computer, because it's like, oh my God, this is the guy that's got to get down there in the dirt with you, So it's very unconventional, absolutely fascinating, and I think anyone who reads this, when I discovered the writing of Harlan Ellison, I was 12 years old, and I found out about it. Someone was asking how I knew about Harlan Ellison before the internet. I was a subscriber to Electronic Entertainment Magazine. It's a computer games journal. And they did a article announcing this upcoming game, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, based on Harlan Ellison's writing. And I went out and I read the story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and I thought, these are the stories I have been looking for my whole life. I mean, I've read incredible stories up until then. By that time, I had already read Dune, I had already read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, incredible stuff, but the thing that just pierced through to my very soul was Harlan Ellison's writing. And I think I encourage anyone out there to go check it out. If you have to start with a single story, I would say I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. But if you're willing to sit down and commit to Harlan Ellison in full book form, Deathbird Stories is definitely a great place to start. So cool, good stuff. Any final thoughts on Harlan Ellison's style in general, Stefan?
Yeah, if you're going to be attracted or interested in the short story genre, or I would say the form, because it is technically supposed to be a 20-minute experience, regardless of who writes it. Harlan provides a very specific, a very adulterated, and fast-paced story. It's not going to slow down, and no, it's constantly moving. It's constantly going. You're going to be entertained. There's sci-fi. There's science fiction as well. There's fantasy. There's science fantasy.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other elements. I haven't read all this stuff, so I don't know what else he can do. But he will go all over the map. I've said this at the start. It's like going to Vegas and having an all-you-can-eat buffet for like 12 days. It's just constant. Every day is going to be different, and you might not like everything, but you're going to have a wild, great time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, awesome. So that concludes a very thorough and very fascinating look into one of the best authors alive on the planet. It's his work will speak to you, whether you. I have never seen someone read Harlan Ellison and just think, meh. It will penetrate. You will have an opinion, one way or the other. This will hit you hard. Uh, I remember. I remember in junior high, actually, I encouraged I encouraged one of my teachers. One of my teachers was fairly avid reader, but he was not familiar with Harlan Ellison, and so I gave him a copy of The Essential Ellison and said, "Read, I have no mouth and I must scream." And a couple days later, he handed me the book back and said, "That was absolutely fantastic, and I'm never reading anything by Harlan Ellison again." So that's the level that we're talking about here. So thank you for joining us, as always, for Book Talk. Please join us next month in April. Our book will be the new Paul Auster novel, 4321. That promises to be really, really stellar. And I'm a huge Paul Auster fan as well, and introducing Stefan to him. So that'll be another interesting conversation, I'm sure. All right. Well, for Stefan and myself, thank you for joining us, and take care.